Ever walk into a crowded room, like instantly size up the situation? Or been captivated by like the sheer size of a cathedral? Our brains are constantly processing these crazy complex scenes, but figuring out how that happens, it's like solving a massive brain-shaped jigsaw puzzle.
It's true. Neuroscientists actually call it the black box problem, you know?
The black box
Im-
problem.
Imagine trying to understand how a supercomputer works, but like all you've got is this blurry telescope and a busted microphone. That's kind of what we're dealing with when we try to study the brain.
Oh, wow. Okay, so not exactly straightforward then.
Nope. The signals are noisy, neurons are always like chattering away, and frankly, our tech is playing catch up.
But thankfully, this research paper we're diving into today, they highlight some really clever workarounds that scientists are using to unlock the secrets of, well, scene processing. And you know me, I'm a sucker for a good detective story. This first workaround, this is right up my alley. They're using something called multivariate pattern classification.
It's pretty wild. Imagine trying to pick out your friend's face in a crowded room.
Right.
You're not just looking for any face.
Right.
You're searching for those unique features, like how they all come together. And it's the same with brain activity.
Okay.
This multivariate pattern classification thing, it helps researchers decode those unique patterns to understand what specific information the brain is processing.
So instead of just measuring like the overall buzz of brain activity, they're zeroing in on the specific conversations happening between neurons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And get this, by analyzing those patterns, scientists can actually tell what someone's looking at, even if the image is like blurry or hidden in noise.
No way. That's
Yeah.
like having mind-reading superpowers, but like with a scientific twist.
Great.
Okay, so we've got our detective hats on. Let's talk about the second workaround, which basically boils down to this.
Yeah.
If you want to understand something, build it. And you know what's really good at understanding complex patterns?
Let me guess. AI.
You got it, AI.
Makes sense. Researchers are building what are called deep neural networks. Basically, AI systems designed to learn and process information in a way that's, kind of inspired by the human brain.
So they're creating artificial brains to help understand our real ones.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does that work in practice?
Well, you can train these DNNs on tons of data, like images, sounds, even text. And through all that training, they learn to recognize patterns, make predictions, even generate their own creative stuff.
That's wild. But how do we connect these AI models back to what's actually happening in our brains?
Well, that's where the third workaround comes in. Remember how we were talking about each brain scanning technique having its own strengths and weaknesses?
Uh-huh.
Researchers have developed this super innovative method called representational similarity analysis, or RSA for short.
Okay, so is that like finding a universal translator for brain data?
You got it. RSA lets us compare data from tons of different sources, whether it's fMRI, EEG, even the activity of those DNNs we were talking about, and it finds the common language that they all speak.
That's so cool. Now we've got these powerful tools to understand the brain. But this research paper that we're diving into today, it focuses on a very specific question. How does the brain perceive the size of a visual scene? I don't know about you, but I've never really thought about how my brain actually perceives the size of a room. It just seems so automatic.
It really is amazing when you think about it. We totally take it for granted, but our brains are constantly processing all this visual information to give us this sense of spatial awareness. And it's not even just about how much space an object takes up in our vision.
Right. Like a super cluttered room can feel way smaller than an empty one, even if they're, technically the same size.
Mhm.
So how did the researchers in this paper even study something so subtle?
Well, they showed people these images of indoor scenes. And these images, they varied not only in size, but also in clutter, brightness, contrast,
Oh, wow.
all those sneaky factors that can really mess with our perception.
Right.
And while people were looking at these pictures, the researchers were recording their brain activity using MEG.
Oh, Meg,
Mhm.
our high-speed brainwave camera. So what did they see happening in those milliseconds when our brains were processing the scenes?
Well, first things first, our brains are fast. We're talking milliseconds here, like a fraction of a second, our brains can figure out how big a scene is.
Wow.
But here's the really cool part. You ready for this?
Yeah.
Those changes in clutter, brightness, even the specific objects were in the scene, it didn't fool our brains at
Yeah.
all.
So it's no matter how much visual noise is thrown at it, our brain just cuts through and is like, yep, small room. Or
Yeah.
huge cathedral.
Pretty much. Our brains are crazy efficient at like extracting this idea of scene size, even when there's tons of other visual information going on.
That's so cool. Okay, but remember those DNNs we were talking about before? Those AI systems like modeled after our own brains. Did the researchers find any connections with how those artificial systems process these scenes and how our real brains do it?
This is where it gets really exciting. When they compared how active the DNNs were to the brain activity from the Meg,
Yeah.
they found some crazy similarities.
Oh, so the AI was scene-sized the same way our brains do,
Exactly. It really suggests that our brains and these AI systems might be using like the same mechanisms to understand spatial information.
which opens up some pretty big doors for research in the future.
For sure.
It's like having this whole new window into how our brains work.
Mm.
And speaking of expanding our horizons, this research, it doesn't just stop at vision. They also looked into how we process, like the size of auditory scenes, which seems like a whole other level of complexity. Okay, so we talked about how our brains see the size of visual scenes, but what about sound? How do you even, like, study the size of an auditory scene?
Yeah, it's tricky because unlike a physical object, sound doesn't really have a size, you know?
Right.
But think about listening to a concert in a tiny club versus a huge outdoor arena. They feel totally different.
Totally. You get that echoey, like, reverberation in the arena, so it's more about how the sound behaves in the space.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what these researchers wanted to know. Like, can our brains tell the difference between different sized auditory spaces just based on how things sound? So they
Yeah.
had people listen to sounds through headphones,
Right.
but these sounds were like carefully designed to mimic the acoustics of rooms of all different sizes.
So instead of building, like, mini concert halls, they built the space using just sound.
Exactly.
That's so cool. So what'd they find out? I mean, our brains treat sound size like an on-off switch, or is it more, complex than that?
Get ready for this, all right?
Okay.
The research suggests that our brains actually represent sound space on like a gradient, like a volume knob.
Whoa, that's wild.
Yeah.
So not just big room or small room, but our brains are picking up on a whole range of auditory spaciousness. That's incredible.
Well, it's really amazing how adaptable our senses are. And this research really just drives home how complex and sophisticated our brains are. Whether we're navigating a crowded street or just chilling in nature, it's incredible.
This deep dive has been awesome. We've talked about how our brains are like detectives, how scientists are using AI to understand our own intelligence, and even how our brains make sense of space, using just sound. So what are the big takeaways we should remember?
I think the most exciting thing is that we're living in this amazing time for brain science. With these incredible new tools and techniques, we're finally starting to crack the code on how our minds understand the world around us.
It feels like we're on the edge of something huge.
Totally. And the possibilities are endless. This research could lead to new ways to help people with visual and auditory impairments, design crazy realistic virtual environments, even build smarter, more human-like AI.
Now that is a future I'm here for. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. If scientists can build AI that sees the world like we do, what does that mean for how we think about our own intelligence? What new questions does that open up? Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.